Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the album wrap episode for the 7th season of the Tom Petty Project. I'm your host, or one of your hosts for today, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. So yeah, today's episode is the album wrap for Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, with my perennial, that's not the right word, is it? Co-host, John Paulsen. How's it going
It's
today?
almost annual. It's probably annual, biannual co-host.
Yeah. What do we do? I don't know, 3 or 4 a year, 4 maybe.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. I'm happy to be here. This is a fun album to discuss because it was definitely uh, one of the lesser regarded albums, and I think that's safe to say in Petty's catalog.
yeah.
But there's a lot of interesting music here to discuss.
Well, and I'd always sort of going into this season, and I think I've said this on the podcast before. I might have even said it in some of these episodes that I've always sort of said that "Let Me Up, I've Had Enough" is probably my least favorite Heartbreakers record, but I think that's probably changed since I've been doing this because I have unearthed a few things that I'd either forgotten about or overlooked, and I'm sure we'll dig into that. So let's throw straight in.
Okay.
Um, but well, no, actually, let's rewind quickly. Do you remember? Because obviously you got into Petty. This album was already out when you got into Petty. So when you went back and listened to this, what was that like? Kind of coming off the back of Full Moon Fever and Into Great Wide Open and the sort of the linear, polished production, and going back to this one. How did it land with you?
Yeah, it's tough for this one to sort of hold up to where I joined the whole Petty camp.
Yeah,
Got into them because I think one thing I was thinking about during the listening to this and over and over again is that uh, I think from Full Moon Fever on, he sort of settled into a production that sounded timeless and sounded like it could have been recorded in the 70s or it could have
yeah,
been recorded in the 90s. But the 80s were a weird time, production wise, as we all know, from a musical standpoint. And there's lots of experimentation going on, some things that didn't stick. So there's some of these albums that sound extremely dated. So I think going back to listen to this when I initially got into Petty, there's some good tracks here. There's stuff that just doesn't sound like Tom Petty did to me at that point.
yeah.
And but there's definitely, he's a fantastic songwriter. Mike Campbell's a great songwriter. So there's definitely moments, there's definitely songs that have stood the test of time. And as you get into the playback box set, which has a number of tracks from these sessions, you really could envision a completely different album could have come out of these sessions.
And we are going to envisage that in quite some detail, I think. I think that's going to be the funnest part of this conversation. But definitely the thing that stands out for me about this one is because there's no external producer on this, there's no one else. There's just the 5 guys. There's no additional musicians. There's no external producer. I think you do lose that sort of, hey, guys, maybe this is a little bit low. Maybe that's a little bit muddy. Maybe that's not your strongest song. You don't get that, that quality control check to say, I wouldn't have done that. Because I don't think there's a few songs on this record that I don't think Jimmy Iovine would have produced the way they ended up on this album. Rick Rubin certainly wouldn't have done, and Jeff Lynne certainly wouldn't have done, right? So it does suffer from that production. There's a bit of fuzziness in it. Like one of the main things that I found myself saying over and over again is I can't really hear how his bass. It's mixed so low and it kind of clashes with the low end frequency. So I think that's, again, as brilliant as songwriters, brilliant musicians and studio musicians as they were, there's an art to producing, there's an art to mixing. Like it's not something that everyone can do. And I think they got it quite right on this record.
Yeah, I think, going back and before every one of these album wrap episodes, I like to go watch the section of the documentary Running Down a Dream, look up the discussions of the album in conversations, just to get a feel for how maybe the band or how the estate views the album. And in Running Down a Dream, it's barely mentioned. I mean, it's a 2 or 3 minute segment. They played Jammin' Me. They might have played one other song or a snippet of it. And Tom was just sort of like, "Let me up, I have enough." It's self-explanatory. Like he's just like kind of that's the only thing he says about it in the documentary. And then in conversations, he said, "I think it worked on some levels. It didn't, and that didn't work on others." He commented about how when he and Mike are producing, I mean, they're both very capable of producing, but are they the best producers for their own album? And I think they've learned throughout this process that they need somebody else to help sort of focus them because they had, as Tom said, they had Mike stuff, which sounded very produced. And then at that point, Tom Tom was just doing stuff off the cuff. There was lots of ad libs. He said his stuff was cruder, and you could definitely tell a difference between the two sides of this album, not album sides, but the two, the Mike side and the Tom side, how different those tracks sound. So that we'll definitely get into that more later.
Yeah, it's that. Again, it's that thing, like, you said that they needed an external producer to really sort of give them. I think everyone does. There are very few records that are completely self-produced. I mean, I think Prince might be an exception, but there are very few people who can produce their own music properly, because you do need that sort of external person to just bounce ideas off. I mean, look, the Beatles had George Martin was the fifth Beatle, for God's sakes. Like, they wouldn't have been the Beatles without that guy sort of saying, well, let's steer it this way, or let's make sure this is right, or no, we need an orchestra, or we don't need that there. You do need that validation. I think that as good as, like you said, as good as Tom and Mike are, they're good in tandem with someone else. I think that's an important thing. And they never went back to this style right afterwards, which is, I think, is telling.
I don't think they did, and I think it's important. I think the musicians and the songwriters they're basically in the woods.
Yeah.
And they can't see the forest for the trees, as they say. And
absolutely,
the producer has the more of the macro view of how things are fitting together, or how things sound, with a critical eye too, or a critical ear, I should say. Like, I don't think Tom and Mike are, maybe listening to their music in the same way that an outside producer would be listening to it, trying to get stuff on the radio, or, thinking about the whole vision of the album.
I guess the analogy would be sort of, because I coach, but when we do evaluations, preseason evaluations, I never evaluate my own kid, right? So I evaluate it because I'm too close to that. Someone else should evaluate my kid to tell me whether she's any good, right? So
that makes sense.
Okay, let's jump in then. So, as always, we sort of talked a little bit offline about which songs we want us to focus in on. And the first one you said was obviously, Jammin' Me. We got to talk about that song because it was the lead single. It was the biggest hit off the record. What are your thoughts on Jammin' Me?
I think it's a really solid rocker opening track to the album, and the things that I would comment, I think this is a great sort of Rorschach test or something to this album, because it peaked at 18 on the Hot 100. It was number 1 on the US rock chart, so it was a hit. You could definitely argue that it was the biggest snub on the first greatest hits package, because it was the biggest hit that was left, in terms of chart performance, was the biggest hit that was left off of that greatest hits disc. And so, like, this is the biggest hit on the album, and it didn't make the greatest hits compilation. So what I'm saying is, maybe the estate and the band didn't view this album, in the same light as it did some of their other work. And that's what I'm kind of getting at with that. But I do think that it should have been on that greatest. We could talk about the greatest hits compilation on another episode, but it definitely should have been on there. The lyrics are mostly written by Bob Dylan, I believe. I think Tom and Mike took the lyrics, changed the music around, and Bob was fine with that, and then released it that way. The lyrics are certainly dated. I mean, you have mentions of Vanessa Redgrave and Joe Piscopo. And there are some interesting things that hearing it again and again, talk about the apple and young Steve's eye. I thought for a while that was a reference to something else, but I think it was Apple, Steve Jobs. Yeah. And then I believe that there's a mention of, Trump building a golf course outside his door, the singer's door. And, obviously Trump has had a big impact on the country in recent years. So there's something, Apple and Trump, and some things that have kind of withstood the test of time. I really like this song. It certainly would be on all my playlists. And, they did go back to it, and they were playing it to open some of those long stands that they were doing in the smaller venues in the 90s. So I think they did get back to it, and they realized how good of a jam it was.
Yeah, the bit you talk about with, Dylan writing the lyrics and then Tom and Mike changing things around. There's that quote in conversation with Tom Petty. He says, I took really just the lyrics of Jammin' Me, completely rewrote the music with Mike, and then I sent it over to Bob to see if it was okay. And he said, yeah, sure. So that's the extent I took. It's just like, it's so Dylan that, eh?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't care, whatever.
Well, it's also Petty telling the story. So it's like, he's like, yeah, sure. And then maybe there was a 15-minute conversation about it, but Petty's like, oh, the crux of it is, yeah, sure.
But there's so many times, like, I've heard Dylan interviewed where he does give sort of, someone will say, they'll give this long ass thing about, and this is what I read into this lyric, and this is what I think about this. And then Dylan will just go, okay. He's It's not that he's not bothered. He just, I don't know. I don't have anything to say about that. So I'm not going to wax lyrical about something where I'm just going to say, okay, I don't know. I think brevity is good sometimes. And one of the other notes that I've made about this one, and again, we will talk about this on Greatest Hits, I think I would definitely put it on ahead of Something in the Air because it just, that's a cover and whatever. But what I'd written, so the way I signed off in the episode notes, I went back to look at what I'd written about this, and I've done this for most of the songs because it's been a while since I sort of did my reviews of them. So I said, is it a bad song? No, it's catchy and it gets your foot tapping. It's also fun live, and I do like the bridge in it as well as some of the ripping piano that Ben Montench is playing down. And then so get this that I wrote, and I don't know if I agree with this anymore. I wrote, but is it a great heartbreaker song? I would say definitely not. I'm not sure what perspective, but I think maybe it is because it's that Dylan influence and it doesn't quite sound like Tom lyrically. So it feels more like, if they jammed that out with Dylan, say they had Dylan come in and sing it, that might have changed that too. That would have been quite interesting to see them do that live on that tour with Dylan. So I don't know, but I'm not 100% sure what my mindset was when I wrote that down. So yeah, find that
interesting. It's also what is your definition of great? And then how many are you going to give, that label to within his catalog versus a very good. I would describe it as a very good Petty song. And I definitely agree that this doesn't sound like pretty much anything else lyrically that he's ever written. And that's because he didn't write the lyrics.
Yeah. very, very simple.
Yeah.
Well, on to things that don't sound like anything else in the catalogue. The next song that we were going to talk about is Runaway Trains. Number 6 on the rock chart.
Yep.
Didn't chart on the Hot 100, which actually really surprised me because it does have that, I'd written down, it's got that sort of 80s action movie feel to it, right? And that was really big at the time. Jan Hammer was all over the charts. You got Axel F, all that kind of stuff. I would have thought that this would have been prime for that kind of era, that it would have done quite well, but it didn't even chart.
Yeah, a few things went through my mind as I heard this over and over, and I realized that it's the third most streamed song on the album. So right. Jammin' Me is number 1. It'll All Work Out is number 2, and Runaway Trains 600,000 on streams on Spotify. So amongst people that are listening to this, the third most popular song on the album, I guess. So I have trouble with it. I think it's a good song. I just don't think this sounds like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I mean, obviously you can hear Tom singing.
Yeah.
But the music is so, and the way it's produced is so out of left field relative to what they typically are producing in this era, in my opinion. So I don't think it fits with a lot of the other stuff that's going on in the album. And there's two other things that occurred to me as I was listening to it. It sounded, obviously the Boys of Summer situation prior to this would have impacted whether or not this song got on the album and whether or not Tom was willing to work with it. And I think that, I think he probably felt like, oh, I missed a shot there at a huge hit when Mike took the music to Don Henley after I turned it down. And okay, I'll listen to this. We'll work this one into the album. It definitely has that Boys of Summer feel to me. It also has kind of a Bruce Springsteen 80s feel to me. And, Born in the USA was a monster hit for Bruce Springsteen in the mid 80s. And I was wondering if, as I was listening, was Tom feeling any pressure? Because his sales had started to decline. Springsteen, his sales obviously peaking. Was there any pressure? Did he feel like he had to sort of fit within what was popular at the time in order to try to have a hit like this? And so I sort of wonder what was going on. It's all speculation, but to me, I like the song, in a vacuum. I don't like it as part of a Heartbreakers record because to me it doesn't sound like a lot of the rest of the music that's on the album. And as soon as you put it on, you're instantly in 1987. And that's not typical of Tom Petty's music. So to me, it doesn't, I'm not crazy about it from that aspect. I think, like I said, in a vacuum, it's a good song. I was listening to it again today on your list, and I'm like, this is a good track. It just doesn't sound part of a Petty album to me.
And in that regard, what you're saying there is it's almost like Don't Come Around Here No More, right? It's the same type of thing where definitely release it as a single because it is a good song, but it doesn't really quite fit with everything else on the album. And we'll get into Producer for a Day later, but I did include it. But I went back to my notes, and I do remember coming in with a big chip on my shoulder about this song and a big preconception that I thought it's not a good song for a lot of the reasons you've said. But then when I went back and listened to it, especially when you listen to the live version, Like actually, the song itself is really good. There's some bloody good
Right.
lyrics in that song. The chorus is fantastic. It's an earworm. It sticks in your head. Again, it's the production though, right? So I think if the arrangement was close to the live version with more Mike on guitar and you could hear how his bass more clearly, I think there is a knockout song in there. It just suffers a little bit from chasing trends, which again, they did it on Southern Accents. They did it on this record where they were definitely had one ear on what's going on in popular music right now, which again, I think after this, that never happens again, right? Tom never
Right.
looks at the zeitgeist and says, well, I want to do this. It's always, no, my strength is writing my music my way. And so I'll stick to that. And that's what's going to make me popular. That's what's going to land for people.
Yeah, and we've had a few of these come up over the course of this where the live version, I mean, you could tell this is a good song.
Yeah.
It's just the production is kind of distracting. Like you mentioned the Miami Vice. I didn't make that connection, but the it's underlying the whole song. It's a little distracting. But the song structure, it's catchy. There's a good chorus to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely things to like about it. Again, it's funny that you brought up "Don't Come Around Here No More" because I had the opposite reaction myself. So spoiler alert, I left "Runaway Trains" off of my producer of the day track list, but I included "Don't Come Around Here No More" because it's so good. Like you have to really, like it's that good. You have to find a way to put it on. So that was my attack on those two songs.
Yeah. And again, this song too has another one. We've talked about this before, definitely, and I've talked about it lots on the pod, where Petty was so adept at writing great opening lines. And so she's up there all alone. I'm down here changing lanes. Again, it's one of those really scene setting, very cool lines that doesn't mean much really in isolation, but it just primes you for what's going to go on, especially with that sort of that really synthy, arpeggiated progression that Benmont's playing. So I really like that opening line.
Yeah, I think there was one line that bothered me, but I thought the rest of it was really strong. It was in the chorus, like when an angel cries.
Right.
Like that just kind of makes me cringe. That doesn't sound like, I don't know. That was not my favorite line of his. I'll just say that.
No, I know what you mean. Okay, what's the next song that we're going to cover?
I believe we're going to go into "It'll All Work Out." So
Absolutely.
yeah, so this is probably my first or second favorite song on the album. Just a gorgeous ballad. The guitar is unusual, so that makes it another thing that kind of makes it stand out as an oddity in terms of it being a heartbreaker song. But I think it fits better than "Runaway Trains" did in terms of the production. Japanese koto was being played by Mike Campbell. This is a funny kind of story behind this because of Tom kind of did a demo but was feeling too close to it, didn't want to finish it. It was kind of about his marriage maybe falling apart.
Yeah.
And he just gave it to Mike and said, can you make a song out of this? And Mike put all the music together, and then Tom came in and sang over it, and it was done. He goes, it was the only time that ever happened, and it's never happened since. That was an unusual way for this to sort of come together. And there is a longer version. It's 3 minutes and 45 seconds that's on the Elizabethtown soundtrack. I rewatched Elizabethtown a few months ago and heard it, and you have to find the soundtrack in order to get that version, because it does extend the instrumental, which is great. So I think it makes it a little bit better.
Yeah, and I looked for that and I couldn't find it. I think I'm going to have to just buy that. I think maybe even we were chatting on Twitter in our DMs, but I think I just got to buy the CD because you just can't find it anywhere, which is weird because you would think it would be on YouTube. So maybe what I'll have to do is rip it and put it on YouTube and see what happens. But one thing too that, first of all, I definitely remarked on this in the episode. I don't know how I missed this song for so long, and it didn't sort of grab me as being, this is one of his best deep cuts as far as I'm concerned. It's an absolutely brilliant piece of music that Mike wrote. It's a beautiful lyric and a heartbreaking lyric. His vocal performance is superb. There's no fat on it. Everything about this song is like basically, check. Everything is brilliant. So I don't know how I missed it. Has this been one that would this been on your sort of playlist? Did you know about this song, or did you sort of rediscover this?
Yeah, okay. No, this is one I knew. Like, I knew a few off of this that stood out, and I will talk about another that I have no idea how I knew it so well. I must have listened to this album, and these particular songs, stuck out more.
Yeah.
But this is one that, this is the second most streamed song on the album, and I think it's a Petty fan favorite.
Yeah.
I was aware of it. It wasn't, top 30 for me. I don't think for most of my petty fandom, but
Yeah.
it was definitely one of the standouts from this album.
I think it's the best song on the album, and by a fair bit. I think like there's other good songs, but there's nothing that's got that X factor that some songs have, that it's just like that just elevates it to this different level. And I give it a 9 out of 10. And the more and more and more I've listened to it, it's like, nah, this is. I mean, if I'm going to call something big a 10, this is definitely a 10, 100%. So
This is like a great example again of a petty ballad that doesn't get released as a single, gets kind of
yeah,
overlooked, but it's one of these slower tracks that are just excellent that fly under the radar because they weren't played on the radio.
maybe that's something I'll have to do, John, at some point, is do a petty ballads episode. And we'll put together a 12 or a 14 track, that you can cuddle up with your wife on the couch with and just throw on. And although they're all going to be breakup songs, so I don't know if that'll work.
Yeah, that makes it a little tough.
The other thing I'd written down too is that, are you a fan of, I don't know, if you ever seen Highlander? You must have seen Highlander, right?
Yes.
The movie. So
Yes.
the scene where they play Who Wants to Live Forever, where it's Heather's aging and Connor isn't, and it's this heartbreak where he knows he's losing her, but he doesn't want to leave her side, and she says, "Will you stay with me forever?" And he says, "I will, Petal." And it's like that rips your heart out. I think this song would have worked really well for that, because it's got that, even though it's got that Japanese codo, it's quite a folky sort of Celtic vibe to it, where I think with all those scenes of the big sweeping rolling highlands would have worked really well. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to go dub that back over top and see if it works.
Yeah, and it's a good point on the Celtic. I wasn't sure how to phrase that. That opening that does sound a little bit Celtic with the Japanese koto, which is interesting. But
yeah, it's Mike Campbell. I mean, again, I'll just learn how to play koto then, because it's not like, it's a weird instrument. The bridges move like on each string; it's individual, so you can do different tunings. But it's got strings, I can play it. Crazy. Okay, the next song, "Ain't Love Strange."
yes, we have to talk about this one. So, I think I DM'd you and threatened to leave the podcast because of your score. I think you gave it a 6 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and looked at. It's only got 207,000 streams, which it was really low for a petty song.
Yeah.
And I always thought this was a minor hit and was released as a single. And the research I did shows that it wasn't. And I don't know how I know this song so well. It must have been from the few times I listened to the album, back in the day, and I put it on my playlist, and it's been on my playlist ever since. So then I hear it a lot more, obviously, because it's on your playlist. But
yeah,
this one to me is just a really, really catchy song. I think it's, up there top 3 song on the album.
yeah.
And I don't know why it wasn't released as a single, but this is just, to me, it's just a fantastic song. It's catchy as hell.
When I don't know, because again, I went back and looked at my notes for this, and I was basically just only positive about it. So I don't know why I gave it a 6, John. It definitely at least a 7, and probably should be an 8 for sure, because it's super catchy, very simple, and I think maybe that's what it was. Where if I'm looking at, I'm looking at this sort of technically as much as I am emotionally, there's not a lot going on in this song. It doesn't change directions very often. There's not a ton of stuff coming in and out, which you usually get in a Heartbreaker song. So I think that maybe that simplicity is what I focused on more than, is it something you're going to sit and hum, and is it going to stick in your brain? Hell yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's a few, portions of the song that really, and I'm scrolling through our conversation here. There was just some really cool moments in it. And I mentioned those to you, so maybe you could throw that if you could dig that up, put them in the notes. Like, just listen to this 5 seconds or 8 seconds of this track. To me, it's certainly probably my second or third favorite song on the album. Probably my second favorite song on the album.
Interesting. Yeah, my last sort of line in the episode was, "This is a really nice bouncy album track, and one that I would never skip, but I wouldn't hold up as a shining example of Tom's songwriting either." So again, like, I don't know, man. I think it is an album track, definitely. I would have been surprised if they had released this one. I don't know if it is a single. I'm not too sure if it's strong enough to hit the charts. And I think there's definitely a little bit of a production issue on this one too. The mix again is not perfect, and we'll get into this when we start talking about some of the outtakes, I think. And I think how his bass definitely could have popped more. But yeah, when I went back so when you'd messaged me and sort of said, "What the dude?" A 6. I went back and listened. I'm like, why did I give this a 6? I don't know. I have no idea. So and I
It's an
think that,
earworm, and to me,
yeah,
I found it. It's the 47 to 52 second mark, the 129 to 150 um, range. Really like get it for me. Like I
yeah.
really like to hear that, especially those sections. So I would have given it a 7.5 or an 8, easy.
Well, and what's the because it's got that that static piano note being played all through it, and I can't remember which song it is. It was I think it was an outtake from uh either Southern Accents or maybe Long After Dark, where there's another song that's got the same thing, or there's another song later on maybe, but they've used that again. I think they end up, yeah, I think it was off something. I think it was off a B side that we've already talked about. Oh, is it Keep a Little Soul? I think that
I
one has
think
a
you
very
mentioned that in our
similar.
conversation. Yes, I think
It's
you
got a
mentioned that in
similar
our
refrain,
conversation.
right? So it's
Yeah.
that thing of that cannibalization of, well, I like that idea, so let's go and put this on this song that we need a bit of, you know. But yeah, it's a fun little song. I like it. Yeah, and I think that once we've gone to, I decided that once we've done Full Moon Fever and we've done the album wrap there, we're going to do a redemption episode where Kev gets to, you can call me out on anything you think I've misrated, and we'll go back and we'll maybe do a little bit of a re-review. So,
Oh, that sounds good. That'll be fun.
okay, I think About Me was the next track. Thoughts?
Uh, yeah. Peaked it. It was a single. This is a good track. I like the opening of it. I think it does sound like one of the songs on the album that could have been recorded in the 70s. It has that sort of production.
Yeah,
Uh, I believe Tom said that this was really ad-libbed
100%
in the
ad libbed. Yeah.
studio. It peaked at 36 on the rock chart. Just a solid album track, and it turned out to be a minor hit for him.
One of the cool, and you can really hear it because, and I noted this, and when you listen to, so obviously, like, okay, I'm going to start playing. Everyone can see my hands, so they know I'm in A. So they start playing A, and they all follow on, and they're good enough that they can, okay, well, this is the bounce and this is the beat of it. But when it gets that din 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 din, Stan's not ready for that push, so he plays straight through it the first time. He just keeps a straight drum beat going. The second time through, then he accents the bam bam, but he gives that on the drums, so you can tell it's live, and they haven't gone back and re-recorded those parts. So I love that little telltale sign that yeah, this is really genuinely a live performance straight through. And then of course Tom goes back and writes the words and comes back and sings them. But what a way to write a song, eh?
Yeah, and I think there's a sweeter spot in between doing it once in the studio for the first time and
Yeah,
releasing that on your album, and doing it 360 versions of it
yeah,
and trying to find the right one, playing it over and over. I mean, it's probably a happy medium there, or maybe 5 or 10. You take your best,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's what they decided to do. I mean, I think there was I mean, I don't think a producer, if there was a third producer or a producer in charge of the album, would have allowed this to happen in terms of just
I
being
have been
ad-libbed.
definitely, and even with
Yeah.
this song, because Tom said like the first chord on the album track is actually copied in from some
Yeah,
later in the
because
song because the engineer didn't know that they were going to start playing and didn't punch in soon enough, right? So
well, I think it's it tells you something about the quality of the band and his songwriting, that he can ad lib a song and it makes the mainstream rock charts, and it
yeah,
goes up to 36.
just bananas, absolutely bananas.
Yeah.
It's just got so much groove and so much. And again, it's another one of those Stones, and we'll get into "Let Me Up, I've Had Enough," the song I think after this one. But this is where they get that Stones vibe just dead on. Like it's perfect, and it's not parody. It's just a song in, like you said, in that 70s blues rock style. Again, it's really really simple. And it's like I'd written down in my episode notes that it's almost like the older, cooler cousin of anything that's rock and roll. The cousin
Yeah.
with the leather jacket and the hot rod car, it's got that swagger to it that you think, yeah, that's
Yeah.
just very, very, very cool.
That's a good comparison.
Okay, so straight into then, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough.
Yeah, this is the title track. I'm a fan, or I'm okay with parentheses in song titles.
Mm-hmm.
I have an issue with it as a album title having
Right.
parentheses, so that's just one little my little quirks. But this is one, and I talk about this just about in every time we do one of these album wraps. Is this is of a song that comes up that I really didn't like or listen to much prior, but then listening to the album 10 or 15 times, really ended up liking a new song. And this is, to me, the one that really stood out in this exercise. You mentioned the Stones feel. It does totally have that feel. I like it when they do their kind of blues swagger. Certainly strikes me as one that Petty was doing when he calls crude. You know, doesn't sound polished and everything. So, and the opening of it reminds me of The Same Old You, which was a previous track that really emerged during was it the Long After Dark album? So yeah, this is one that really popped up as I listened to this one.
Yeah, it's funny because this is one that I think honestly, probably this only gets on the album, especially when we find out later on all the outtakes that were available to choose from. I think this gets on the album because Tom likes that line. That let me up, brackets, I've had enough, because it was Stan Lynch, right? That's where Tom says that came from. It's a saying that Stan Lynch had, and Tom liked it, so he wanted to write a song. And I think that only makes that because you've already got, the song we just talked about, Think About Me. Well, this is the same song, really. It's the same kind of vibe. It's the same thing. And I don't need to hear that again. I've already heard this already. I've already heard the Heartbreakers do this. I've already heard them doing it on this side of the record. So to me, it's just a bit, I don't know. I'd rather have had one of those other outtakes in there than this one. And it's just, to me, it's a bit, it's okay. It's an album track. It kind of sounds like a blues bar band doing a jam. There's nothing wrong with it per se. It just doesn't really excite me very much. And I also think it's a little bit long. Like, it just drags a little bit for me. And it's only 3:30 or 3. But I think, okay, this song's over now. Why are you still playing this outro? So
I love it when they do this stuff. So I included it on mine. And I feel like you have to have the title track with the album if you're going to leave. I mean, you could have changed the name, but yeah, it's a great line. And I think the chorus is really good as well. So I kept it.
Damn the Torpedoes. There's no song called Damn the Torpedoes on the album. You can have Let Me
Well,
Up.
I'm
Or
saying,
Have
like,
Enough.
if you're gonna name the album "Let Me Up, I've Had Enough," and you have a song called "Let Me Up, I've Had Enough," it'd be tough to cut it.
Can I go Queen? Sheer Heart Attack, the third album. The
Did they
song
cut
Sheer
it?
Heart Attack doesn't appear. There isn't a song called Sheer Heart Attack. They then wrote a song called Sheer Heart Attack on their sixth album. Who's those? So, yeah. I'm feeling belligerent today. I'm gonna fight back. No, I know where you're getting at. Okay, so the last song we wanted to cover in a little bit of detail was "The Damage You've Done."
Yeah, and we could talk about that one, or we could talk about How Many More Days, because I think I included The Damage You've Done on my alternate playlist.
Yeah.
We both included How Many More Days. But The Damage You've Done is interesting because there is a country version first take on the playback box set, which sounds completely different. It was an
so much better.
Yeah. You like the country version better?
So much better.
Interesting.
So much better.
See, I think there's just a good song there, so that's why I retained it, and I like the song in general. It's definitely rougher. I would like to have heard, I think Tom could have gone off and written a fantastic country album if he ever wanted to do that. But it was rougher production wise, obviously. But I just think the song is really solid.
It's funny because, again, we haven't disagreed that much during these, and we've had like points where we've sort of argued better or stronger or much stronger or whatever. But honestly, this is by far the weakest song on the album for me. And it's one that is the only time so far in doing this podcast where I've gone in and I like a song less after sort of diving into it. Because to me, it's very monotonous. There's not a tongue on it. I don't like the fade in. I don't know why.
I'm not a big fan of
on
fade-ins
these.
either. Yeah.
It just sort of, I don't know. It sort of grates on me a little bit. I think the country version is better, and we should talk about. Let's get into this now, because I think one of the things that when you go back and when you go to listen to the outtakes, a lot of those outtakes are going to make our albums, our resequenced albums. But part of that is the production, because they've definitely mixed those in 96 for playback, or 2000. When was American Treasure? Was that 2019? Something around there. I can't remember when that was released. So they've definitely, Ryan Oliade and Mike Campbell have gone in, and Tom for playback. They've gone and remixed those, so they sound better. They just sonically sound better. They're just definitely way better produced. And this is one of those songs that I think really exposes that, where we've got two versions of the same song, one that's been produced much later on with a third ear, and then one that was produced during these sessions. And you can see the difference to me. It's night and day, the difference in quality in the sonics.
So The Damage You've Done, that appeared on the American Treasure?
I think it was American. It was either American Treasure or Playback. Yeah, I can't remember.
I know it was on the country version was on Playback.
Playback, then, yeah. There you
go. But I wondered, it'll be interesting to hear. There is a version of it on alternate version on American Treasure. So that's, it would be interesting to listen to that versus the Let Me Up, I've Had Enough
Yeah.
version that was released on the album. Because one of the things I really wondered, listening, it was, playback was great, came out. The Nobody's Children disc to me is phenomenal. It's like the
Yeah.
Lost Petty album. But as you mentioned, I was wondering, I was actually going to pose that question. What did they do prior to that release? Because those tracks sound very different than Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. They sound like they were recorded in the 90s. So if they're reproduced or remixed in the 90s, that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense.
I mean, there's no question in my mind that that's the case. And they don't, I was looking through and I can't see, not an American Treasure at least, I can't really tell which ones were and which ones weren't specifically produced because there's just sort of blanket producer credits on most of them. But you can hear it. Like if you listen to if you just listen to the quality of the production on it and the engineering on it and the mixing, it's just different. Like it's way, way better. I mean, the whole of Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. I was talking to Dallas Ellico, one of my other previous guests, about this too, and he says the same thing. Like even when you listen to the vinyl version of Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, and then you listen to the Spotify version right now, that's definitely been remastered, and it might have even been slightly remixed because it's definitely better quality. It just sounds better. It pops better. There's a little bit more low end in it. It's a little bit, I don't know. It just sounds crisper.
The Spotify version?
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
I really want, I didn't realize The Damage You've Done was on American Treasure. So I want to listen to that and see how much different that sounds compared to the original version. Let's just discuss the B-sides for a second.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And maybe I should have gone into that as we were talking about it, but we had Make That Connection, the B-side to Jam and Me, which is not a super complex song, but a great jam.
Yeah.
Got My Mind Made Up. That ended up on a Bob Dylan album, and I went and listened to that, and I was like, okay, I could see.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to do particularly well. It wasn't really highly streamed on his album or anything. It doesn't seem like it's a favorite of Dylan's fans. Ways to Be Wicked, which is incredible.
How does that song not make this album, John?
How does that song not make it?
It's unbelievable.
I mean, how does Got My Mind, My Mind Made Up not make it? How does Can't Get Her Out make it? That's the fourth one I wanted to mention. And then so those four for sure should have made the album, and they certainly sound so good. I mean, Make That Connection was released back then, but the other three sounded so good on the Nobody's Children disc. And then I have a little bit of a bone to pick with the inclusion on your end of You Come Through. You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Now, this is one of my favorite Petty songs, period. You Come Through. But I could not in good conscience put it on my Let Me Up alternate track list, because one of the things that makes it so great is that Lenny Kravitz came in, played the drums, played the bass, did some vocals, and he did that in 1995. So that doesn't happen. I can't put it on this album, but I understand why you did. It's a phenomenal track. So I just wanted to, let the listeners out there, if they're wondering why I didn't include it, that's why. It was finished in 1995, and I can't include it in good conscience.
And so my only counter argument to that, and because I knew that would come up, and because I was wondering the same thing, why is he not put on there? I know he loves this song. The song itself was written in those sessions. It was arranged then. The vocals are all, you know what I mean? So to me, the song is from that time. So, because it's the same thing with, we just talked about with the playback and American Treasure, where they've gone back and reproduced those. Yeah. They wouldn't have sounded that way had they been included and released on.
But at least there was an actual drum track. There was a click, there was a click track, and you have this like mega late 80s 90s star Lenny Kravitz, playing on it. So to me, like in my alternate world, I would have loved for this track to be finished in 93 or whatever the first greatest hits album, and that it would take the place of something in there. I mean, I think that would have been the perfect place for it, released as a single, and then all of a sudden he's releasing Mary Jane's Last Dance and You Come Through back to back as part of his greatest hits package. I think that would have been just phenomenal.
I'd have melted faces because it is so good. And it's funny because I like Kravitz's first 2, 3, 4 albums. I think he got a little bit mired down in his own sort of ethos after that, but it sounds like a Kravitz song as well. It sounds like a like Tom Petty and Lenny Kravitz had a baby, and it's this
Yeah.
song. You know what I mean?
Yeah. With Mike Campbell playing guitar.
Yeah, I'm playing some sweet guitar on this song.
Yes, it's an incredible song. So I'm just not going to include it. But
Yeah.
I understand why you did. I would pick a bone with that, or bone to pick with it.
Yeah.
Producer of the day. So I just would like to say this about it before because I know there's some purists out there that are like, why do these guys do this? Like, why do they do this? But as Tom said about the album, it was really two different things. I love Mike Campbell, but I think in the late 80s, I mean, I love Mike Campbell. You know, I love Mike Campbell. He's probably my favorite classic rock guitarist of all time. He knows exactly what to play, when to play it. He's come up with so many of the great riffs in Petty's catalog. But there's this overly produced music. So that's why I left off Runaway Trains. I tried to use the great leftover tracks to make a more cohesive album that sounded maybe a little cruder, a little rawer, or what Tom was going for at that time. Because I think we get an album that's timeless as opposed to one that really sounds like it was recorded in the 80s.
Yeah, that's fair.
Is that how you kind of approached it as well, or?
I kind of approached it like I took all the songs that we had available from the sessions, including you come through. I thought, okay, well, which do I think are the strongest 12? Because and I always pay attention to time because I'm a vinyl nerd. So I thought, well, I've got to have two sides. They've got to be balanced because I got 23 minutes and no more. Can I pick 12 songs or 11 songs or 12 songs that I think are the 12 strongest out of this cohort? That's what I did. And from there, then I thought, well, how do I sequence those so there's a bit of flow to this album? And how do I want it to flow? And we've taken very different approaches in that, which I found interesting. The note that I've made is you've definitely gone for a lot more sort of build and release on side one with putting it'll all work out. So maybe just go through side one and tell us what your.
All right, I'll do mine first, and then I'll comment on yours after you go through yours. So side A, Jamming Me, really solid opening. Why not just keep it? It's a good opening track. Number 2, Ways to Be Wicked, kind of keep that energy going. Would have been another good single for him. And then we take a little bit of a break, as you mentioned. It'll All Work Out comes 3.
Yeah.
And then follow that up with Ain't Love Strange, which I think all 4 of these tracks could have been singles. Ain't Love Strange, kind of pick up the pace again. Then you get into Make That Connection, which I think is a little bit different than Ain't Love Strange in that it's louder. It's not particularly fast, but it's a loud rocker. And then close the side with Can't Get Her Out. And you're kind of taking that energy into having to flip the record over, because at that point you're like, okay, what's going to start this next side?
Yeah.
And Let Me Up, I've Had Enough opens it, so you have the album track properly on the album. Opening side 2 with a bunch of energy, and I think those 2 songs actually go good back to back if you play it that way. And then Got My Mind Made Up, side B, track 2. I included The Damage You've Done, and I'm right now going to say I might be swapping that out with the newer version of that from the American Treasure. I want to hear that to see if that maybe sounds better with the rest of the album. Then I had Think About Me at track 10, fourth track on side B. All Mixed Up, I think, is kind of an underrated track on this. I think it's pretty catchy. I think I had a little bit of a problem, and we ended up differing on a few songs that were cut and kept. I think there's this little tier of songs that I wasn't sure what to keep, and I wasn't sure. Like, I think, for example, Runaway Trains is a better song just construction wise than some of these, but I don't think production wise it fit with what I was trying to go for. So All Mixed Up was the second to last song on the album, and then I close it because I do like to close things with kind of a wistful feeling. I think How Many More Days is a love song. It's got a nice piano. We talked about it briefly earlier, but I think it's the piano on it's great, and it's a great way to end the album.
And so then because looking through yours, the note that I've made on yours was that again, Let Me Up, I don't have on mine. So, but I would have switched the last 2 tracks because I think the All Mixed Up has got that sort of, it's taken us down, right? And really taken us down. And so I think having those 2 in sequence next to each other works, but I would have just flipped those the other way around.
Interesting.
Neither of us included My Life, Your World. That's the one that we agreed on isn't making the album.
Yeah, not my favorite.
And it's one that I think a lot of Tom Petty fans like. It gets, when I put the episode out, the comments were all favorable on Facebook. I was like, oh man, yeah. And again, I think it's one of those things that it's a very 80s heartbreaker song that just doesn't hold up. Like you said, if you're going to take Runaway Trains off, you can't put this one on either because it's the same type of area.
I think this is where maybe older Petty fans would differ from us, because if they're listening to these albums as they come out, then they associate these songs and these albums with their lives at that time, and they might listen to this and Mike's Life, My World, or whatever it is, might bring back some memory of theirs from their life at that point, whereas we're going back and listening to it way after the fact, as we listen to a pile of great Petty songs, and just have a different sort of feel about it. I think that's probably because so much of music is like how it brings back memories in your head of maybe the first time you heard it, or something that dramatic in your life that happened at that time, and maybe that song either was the soundtrack to that moment or something that helped you through it. And I think a lot of older fans, and they're probably a lot more purist when it comes to, why are you guys doing these alternate track lists, whereas we're just sort of picking and choosing our favorite songs and trying to get them on the album in a sequence that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just fun to do, right? I think there's nothing. It's not saying that it shouldn't be that way. It's just something fun to do. The one thing about that song too, though, that I thought is that it is a Mike Campbell piece of music that Tom goes back. It feels like they're really working hard to make it work. It doesn't feel natural, that song. It feels like a struggle. Everything about it just feels like they're fighting against it. They know there's something in there. They're not quite sure how to get the best out of it, and I don't think they do. So it's another one of those, like the Boys of Summer type thing, like you said, where Tom's maybe got one eye on not wanting to miss that opportunity if it is there, but it falls a little bit flat, that one. So
there was 3 that were Mike Campbell compositions. Is that correct?
5 off this album.
Oh, 5?
Well, 5 co-writes. I mean, Jamming Me, obviously with Mike and Bob, Runaway Trains, My Life, Your World, All Mixed Up, and Let Me Up, I've Had Enough.
Okay. I would have thought that Let Me Up, I Had Enough was more of a Tom composition, but the guitar, you could definitely hear Mike's riff.
And I've just realized
I was thinking of the ones that maybe Mike brought pretty complete. Maybe I was thinking, so it was Runaway Trains, My Life, Your World, and then did you say All Mixed Up?
All Mixed Up, yeah.
Okay, so those I think are the ones that he brought completed, but maybe Let Me Up, I was in that pile of songs as well.
Yeah, and I just realized I've taken out 3 Mike Campbell songs. Which, apologies to Mike Campbell if you're listening, Mike. Of course,
we love you, Mike. If you listen,
we love you, Mike. Yeah. So the way I arranged this, I just wanted to melt faces on side 1. I thought, you know what? Let's just hammer people on side 1, keep everything up, and then on side 2, then we can get sort of a little bit more funky. So I went with Jamming Me again. I think that song, it is an opening song. It's an album opener all day. You can open concerts with it. It's got that energy to it. If you're going to put it on there, it's got to be at number 1. Think About Me, I put it at number 2. Because then you can keep that. Now we're getting into party mode. From there, go straight into Ways to Be Wicked. Because again, it's still got that up tempo. It's major key. It's a lot of fun. Then go into Ain't Love Strange. Keeping the tempo, man. The tempo is high on this side 1. You Come Through. Then is the 5th one. So it's a little bit of a drop, but you've still got the same major key vibe. And I think if you take out Kravitz's voice, but you keep his drum line and bass, I think it works. I think it would work. And then Got My Mind Made Up would be my closer. And I think, I mean, that's the Dylan one, right? The one that Dylan recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, their version is so much better. Petty's version is so much, and that it's almost like to me, it's like a precursor to Mojo, because he's got that thing he's doing with the effect on his voice. Sounds like US 41. And he's kind of drawn them, and it's got that feel of sort of that bluesy, swaggery kind of thing to it. So that's my closer. Side 2, Can't Get Her Out, open up with. I went with Self-Made Man because I love that track. It's in that same vein to me as Spike. It's like it's Bedfellows with Spike, where it's got a similar mystique to it. It's this guy who you don't really know too much about. He seems like a bit of a renegade, a bit of a maverick. So I kind of like that one in there, and I like those tracks at song 2 on side 2. I think those always work well. How Many More Days, I really like at spot 3, but I would love to hear a better mix of that, a better version of it. Make That Connection, which I always think is like that's coming out of the Dylan thing, because that's when Dylan went electric and he did things like Groom Still Waiting at the Altar, and he had these big blues jam numbers. It sounds like one of those to me. So I've got that one sort of anchoring side 2. Runaway Trains as the penultimate track, and then It'll All Work Out, because I like it'll all work out being the coda to the whole thing, because that line, It'll All Work Out, it's a fairly down song, really. Lyrically, it's quite challenging, but it's got that release. It's got a little bit of redemption in there. Well, I think eventually it's all crap now, but it'll all work out. And I think that's a nice way to close out an album. So that's my
Yeah.
justification.
Yes, and I have a few notes.
Yeah.
And we picked 9 of the same songs.
Yeah.
You included "You Come Through," "Self-Made Man," "Runaway Trains." I included "Let Me Up," "I've Had Enough," "The Damage You've Done," and "All Mixed Up." Again, I don't think that "You Come Through" should be on here. I'm point of contention. That's okay.
Yeah.
I really liked your transition from "Jamming Me" to "Think About Me." Had listening to this a couple times this morning. I think those 2 songs go well together. We both put "Ways to Be Wicked" on side A because we both recognize how great of a song it is. We both put "Ain't Love Strange" fourth.
Yeah.
So that's good to see that you've sort of admitted that you were wrong with your score and you want to get it out there on that first side. I have other note was title track question mark exclamation point question mark as my last note, second to last note. But we talked about that, and I do think that it'll all work out. I thought about putting that last as well because we've talked about the leaving things on a really quiet, wistful type note. I do think that "How Many More Days" sort of fits that as well. So that's the way I went. And I did go with more of an up and down journey, whereas you're very up tempo, but there are these songs aren't so similar that they don't fit together in terms of like being repetitive. Like your first side has definitely got its own, each song has its own characteristics and sound distinct from the others.
Yeah. It's fun. It's always fun to listen to because I mean the other thing is with certain albums, your brain already starts humming the melody to the next song because you know what the sequence is. One of the nice things about doing this, and especially when you like, I've got my sequence. When I go listen to yours, it takes you out of that a little bit, and it's jarring in a sense of, oh no, that's not what I was expecting. But sometimes, like I said, there was one especially that I loved. I was going to see which transition was it. I thought was fantastic. Oh, it was saying that, putting "It'll All Work Out" as track 2. But when you go from "It'll All Work Out" into "Ain't Love Strange," when that stops and the next one starts, that was like, oh man, that sounds great together. That really, really works. Which made me think, oh, I really want "It'll All Work Out" at track 12, but that transition's really, really good.
Yeah.
Everything about it sonically,
it's such a good song too that I wanted to get it on side A. So I'm still sort of in that mindset of getting the really good stuff on the front and then trying to make that second side work with the sort of album tracks. But even like I think About Me and All Mixed Up, my number 10, number 11 tracks, they were both released as singles. So it's a pretty strong album and we knew we were going to do this when we were, getting ready to talk about this album, was that with 4 or 5 tracks off of Nobody's Children that are just really, really, really strong, that this one was going to get this track list was going to get hacked up pretty good. The original one.
Yeah. I think that's the most outtakes that have been released from one album session, right? I'm pretty sure that's
And what's crazy is that it, is maybe it's regarded as one of his least popular albums, but there were all these outtakes that were sort of left off, and maybe the way that it happened is the right way because we got these remixed and they sound so good, and if they had been on the original, we wouldn't have gotten these great versions of "Ways to Be Wicked," "Can't Get Her Out," "Got My Mind Made Up," "You Come Through," etc. That now are the quintessential versions of those songs. I mean, they're the only versions of those songs, but how much better are they that they ended up on the playback box set than they did on this album?
Yeah, no, just "Ways to Be Wicked" in any form is better than about half of this album. I mean, that could have been a single for sure.
So this is a case of what I was talking about, where you are the artist and the songwriter, the album or the band are in the forest and they can't see sometimes what their best songs perhaps. And if there was a producer there in charge, might have said, guys, "Ways to Be Wicked" has to be on there. "Can't Get Her Out" has to be on there. "Got My Mind Made Up" has to be on there. So I just wonder the conversations that were had. To me, when you have an album like this with this much potential, what was the conversation of what we're going to keep and what we're going to leave off? Because
great to be a fly on the wall there.
Yeah, that'd be incredible, wouldn't it?
Amazing. Yeah, and it's the same. Like I know that happens all the time with artists, right? About well, the record company wants to release this as a single. There can sometimes be tensions in the band if you've got multiple songwriters. And I remember, Night at the Opera, Queen's huge album with Bohemian Rhapsody. Brian and Freddie just couldn't believe that the record company wanted to release You're My Best Friend. They're like, well, that's just John's little love song. Like, why would we release that as a single? Like, are you kidding me? Of course, that's a single. Ends up on Greatest Hits, of course, because it ends up being a big hit. But so it's that. I think that, like you said, when you're so close to it, you don't necessarily. You maybe shouldn't be making the decision.
Yeah, perhaps.
So, okay. So did you do an EP? Did you pick your top 3? And if you didn't,
it's okay. I didn't, but I think I can. Well, we're including all these options.
We're including all these options. Yeah.
Oh boy, I can't in good conscience put You Come Through on there, so that at least excludes that one. I would say
doesn't make mine either.
Okay, I would say Ways to Be Wicked, It'll All Work Out, and Ain't Love Strange, and that's tough because we're leaving Jamming Me Off, we're leaving Can't Get Her Out. I Got My Mind Made Up.
Yeah.
But if we're including the Nobody's Children stuff, it makes it a little bit difficult. But I think I would include Ways to Be Wicked, It'll All Work Out, and Ain't Love Strange.
Man, I've got 2 of the same.
Okay.
So I got Ways to Be Wicked, It'll All Work Out, but then I've gone with Think About Me because I love that song so much. But Ain't Love Strange probably would be my 4th now. I've had my eyes opened.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've done that's the album wrap for Let Me Have Had Enough. The next time we get together, we're gonna be talking about a pretty amazing album, a pretty huge album, not just in Tom's career, but in rock and roll history, really, right?
Yeah.
Seminal achievement.
We're getting into the stretch here where I truly discovered Tom and his music and fell in love with it. So I'm excited to talk about Full Moon Fever. I think it's a near perfect album, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, about, I don't know, 13 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to start reviewing the songs from Full Moon Fever. Bye-bye.